that are separate, and that will easily find out if I can. So when we design a scale, right, the first thing is to define the construct, right? What do we mean by leadership? Right? Already that would involve some theoretical foundation, some work to say, here is what we mean by it. And then we would generate a ton of items that actually measure this. So let's say if you think leadership is being in control, being authoritative, you know, having having a way of getting people to do what I want, etc., right? More like an authoritative view, then those would be the type of items you might generate, right? If your view of leadership is more maybe democratic, right? Where you say, hey, I'm inclusive with people, I'm serving the team, I'm serving my followers, etc., right? You would change those items and they would measure more construct that might be called servant leadership or something like that, right? So this is the first thing. It's based on a theory. It's based on an understanding. So you develop a ton of items, you develop an item pool, and then you give these items to a pilot sample of people, right? They start completing these surveys. And based on this initial pilot study, you would then reduce the items. One aspect can be understanding of people, right? That you would have them think aloud. They tell you, oh, you know what? These items are not really worded that well. I don't know what you mean here. This is confusing, etc. Right? Or your items don't really work out from a statistical sense of view. Okay? So here is the two processes here: deductive examples or inductive. Okay. And the assessment. So these are all pieces that are here in the steps 1, 2, and 3. Here, you'll next class, you will actually do a factor analysis in the statistics class. And the factor analysis is a way of identifying which of my items go together and measure a similar construct. Okay, so let's assume you're doing a little bit more of an advanced leadership questionnaire, right? You have some items type into authoritative leadership, and some items tap into participative leadership, let's say, right? So you would expect that somebody that answers high on authoritative probably would answer low on the participative items, right? And vice versa, right? So with a factor analysis, you can analyze which items would measure which construct. Does that make sense so far? I mean, this is kind of a high level overview, and you'll go into more detail in the next class here. But this here would be what we call explorative factor analysis, where you just kind of look where does the data fall? How does the data play out? And then we have a statistical procedure called confirmatory factor analysis, okay, where you say, oh, these first 4 items, that were items that measure authoritative leadership. Then I had 4 more items that measure participative leadership. And I know exactly these 4 go here, these 4 go here, and I can specify that in my model. Right? And now you can test with your data, does my data match this model, right? So can I confirm the data structure with my theory? And this is actually a stronger test of your structure, right? The first one, the explorative, is exploratory factor analysis. You discover how this plays out, right? And then in a confirmatory factor analysis, you actually constrict your model and your test, is it really that way? And usually what we do is we randomly split our sample. Let's say we have 400 people that helped us pilot the survey. We would take 200 to do an exploratory factor analysis and see how do these items play out. And then we would take the second 200 and use them for a confirmatory factor analysis where we can test it, confirm basically that structure. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then what we do is the validity, right? Here we talk about the structure of our survey. The next piece is, do we have convergent or discriminant validity, right? So basically, if you have an existing survey that measures authoritative leadership, that survey should correlate. If a person fills out your new survey and that existing survey, the factors authoritative leadership should correlate highly with each other, right? If people that score high on the existing survey on authoritative leadership also score high on your scale, then that would support a convergent validity, right? They could say, hey, we already know this thing here measures what you're trying to measure. Now, if your new thing correlates with the existing thing, then that indicates us that this likely is something similar. Now, discriminant validity would be the opposite, right? Where we say, hey, if you're authoritative, you should not be, you're probably low in participatory leadership, right? So there should be a negative correlation between things that your instrument is not, right? Things that your construct is not. Let me make an example, another one. Let's say if you have a scale that measures courage of people, right? It should be positively associated with other courage measures or boldness measures, right? Or confidence measures, right? Whereas it should be negatively correlated with anxiety measures or cowardness measures, right? So you get that idea? So we try to increase the validity by comparing to other things that we know already, right? That's one way to support that. And then the last thing is to replicate your study, right? To basically take this survey and now test it with another sample. Test it maybe with a different age group or test it in a different region, right? So that in a nutshell is a quick overview of the development of a scale. Right? So you can see it's quite intense, and this is one of the processes that you can use, or this is actually a recommended process, a best practice to come up with a research instrument. And most of the time, not always, but most of the time, when you find instruments that are being used in peer-reviewed journals, they might not give you the detailed overview of the process that they went through, but they should give you at the very least, you know, a factor analysis, a reliability analysis, and some indications of convergent or discriminant validity. So that you should see at the very least. Questions, comments? So you guys are a bit quiet. Did that make sense? If it didn't, that's okay too. That's a lot of information to take in. But at a broader level, did it kind of make sense what I just shared?
Yeah, made sense.
Okay, cool.
I think it'll make more sense once I read the article too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Exactly. Exactly. So this is a good, it'll make a lot more sense. This article is pretty detailed, right? And then what's cool is in the next class with Dr. Trace, you will do, you won't do a confirmatory, but you will do an exploratory analysis. But then if you're interested, I can show you some stuff that's it's really neat what you can do, right? For example, you can test using statistical methods. Do men and women respond to survey similarly, right? You could say, hey, this survey works really well for men, but women understand these questions in different ways, so it doesn't really work for women. That can happen. Hopefully that your instrument is not like that, but that can happen. And you can test it out.
Dr. Wandler, can you address the cross-comparative research validity issue?
What was that?
Cross-comparative research validity issue?
Oh, I'm not familiar with that. What the cross-competitive?
Comparative. Comparing, when you cross-compare the research with different measures.
So when you use a measure in different studies?
Right. Well, the thing is when they try to compare the results of the two samples that were not measured with the similar instruments.
Oh yeah, when it's not measured with the same instrument.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's hard. That's hard. It's kind of like imagine that you and I you own a scale and I own a scale, but my scale is a little bit less sensitive, right? And now we're going on a trip, and you want to make sure that you don't have to, that you're at the 50-pound level for your big suitcase, right? And me too, right? And if I use my scale, it's not measuring that well, right? I might say, hey, I'm at 49 pounds, but really I'm at 51. And if I came to you and yours is really exact, you could tell me, hey, this is 51 pounds, right? And this is even that we have we're both measuring pounds, right? It really depends on how close are the surveys to each other. And that at times, I have looked at surveys when I actually had the data, right? I could say, okay, 1 year they asked these questions, the next year they asked some of the same, but then they added some stuff, right? And I'm like, oh gosh, right? So let's just make it simple, right? We had 10 items in year 1, and then we had 10 items in year 2, but 2 of them were different, right? Now I could have been tempted to say, all right, I'm going to do the average of these 10, compare the average of the next 10, but the content switched, right? 2 items are different. So guess what I did? What would you guys do? What would you guys do to make sure that the year are comparable to each other?
You would have to drop you can't do comparison anymore. If you have additional items, then that would become your base for the next comparison. You just can use what you've been consistently using if you're comparing or you're using a trend.
Exactly, yes. So I just used the 8 that were the same, the common 8, and I just went with that. So that's that. Okay. So when the items are different, it can get it's really hard, right? When the items are the same, then we can actually test. What we can test is what we call for measurement invariance, and that this gets a little bit more technical, but there's now ways for example, we measure hope over 3 years. Okay, I don't did I lose you guys for a bit? Or did you guys hear me all the time?
No.
Okay, sorry. I just got a message. My internet is unstable. Uh, for example, I measured hope over 3 time points, right? 3 years in a row. And what you can do is to test for measurement invariance, which, although I'm using exactly the same items, right? It could be that the item is interpreted a little bit differently across the years, right? So if I use really more advanced statistics, we can test and see if the items actually mean the same thing in a mathematical sense over the 3 years. But that's, again, that's when you have access to all the data, right? You can really test the math behind it. When you just comparing your study to other studies where you don't necessarily have access to their data, right? It would be more at a, you know, you just have to look at the content. What did they have in their survey? What are they telling you? What did they have done in the survey? And what did I find? And then you can say, okay, you know, Monica did a study where she measured hope, and she found these data patterns. She found this study where she measured hope. She found another pattern, right? And then you can discuss it that way and say, okay, you know, on average, hope of, let's say, you know, Monica and Lisa looked at freshman students in college. You know, they found these type of data. On Ayeli at people in elderly homes, they found this type of averages, right? So then it's more descriptive. Does that make sense, Monica? Does that?
Yes, thank you.
All right, great.
Is
Other
there,
questions?
is there any limit to the number of cases that you may have in a certain construct? Is there a limit? Like when you do factor analysis and you form different factors or clusters, is there a limit? How many can you have in a single cluster?
How many factors you can have in a single question?
No. How many cases or how many questions in a certain cluster?
Yeah, there's some limitations to that. So it usually is that you should have 10 times more participants than you have items. So let's say if you have 10 items, you should have 10 times 10, you should have 100 people, right? If you have 20 items, you should have 200 people. And that's just kind of a rule of thumb. And then, to be honest with you, the factors, it could be between 1 and 20. You know, it could be that your survey measures, let's say you have 20 items, right? It could be that your factor is just one thing. So you have one factor. Or it could be that your 20 questions are tapping into 20 different things. So it could be that you have 20 different factors, which would kind of, you know, it would defeat the purpose, right? Because the goal with the factor analysis is to kind of reduce the complexity, right? Mm-hmm. Say, you know what, we got 4 or 5 things that measure the same thing. We're going to make one thing out of that. And then we have another 4 or 5 things that measure something. So instead of 20 little things, we have, let's say, 4 factors. And now we're just going to talk about these factors. And what the advantage of that is that each factor has basically 4 measures, or let's say if it's, it's 4 factors, each factor has 5 items, which are essentially 5 times that you're trying to measure this particular factor. Mm-hmm. Right? So we're making it more precise. Right, so imagine if I'm heading for my trip with my suitcase, right, and my scale is off and it's always a little wobbly. You know, one time I get under, it's 49, then I get under, it's 51, and then I go under again, it's again 51, then I go under and it's 52. right? And now the average of all these measures tell me, hey, you're probably over 50 than under 50, right? So it's kind of the same idea with asking several items that your measure becomes more precise. And then, okay, and then I'll be quiet. When you look at this factor with 5 items, what you now could call is that convex alpha that you might have seen in articles, right? The reliability, that's calculated within each factor. That tells us how consistent are these items within the factor. And there we have a rule of thumb that it should be over 0.7, right? The reliability. Reliability can be between 0 and 1, right? 0 is like it's not reliable at all. 1 is it's perfectly reliable, right? And that's really hard to achieve because basically it means that you're always getting the exact same answer. That will mean that your questions don't really vary that much, right? So actually 1 is not really that good either, right? And hence that rule of thumb that above 0.7 is good. I really am happy when it's around 0.8, 0.9, or in there. I'm like, yeah, this is great. You know, 0.8 is great.
Mm-hmm.
Because after a while, you have, again, that's my last comment, you have a little bit of a trade-off between reliability to be really consistent, right, versus validity to cover a certain area of a construct. I don't know if that makes sense. You'll see, if you might have seen in one of the videos that talk about different targets, right, like the target symbol, right? You could be really precise, but you're very narrow, right? And now you want to be you might want to be a little bit broader, you less precise, but you're a little broader, you cover more of the area of the meaning of a construct. All right. Well, thank you guys for sticking around. I hope that that this was good information.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Time to explain it.
What is it?
Thank you for taking the time to explain it.
Oh, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. No, you'll see this is great stuff. So next course you'll get to do this, and hopefully you'll remember what we talked about.
And just to clarify, I guess we are expected to use, if we